Good morning to those of you on the West Coast Pacific time zone. I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Lybra Clemons, the Chief Diversity Officer at Twilio this morning. So Lybra comes with an amazing profile. Lybra, I'm so happy to have you with us today.
Hi, thanks, Nancy. I appreciate you reaching out and wanting to hear what I have to say.
Well, I was going to say, after I read your bio, Lybra, I think it'll be very clear, what folks are going to take away from today's conversation.
All
So
right, I hope
here
I
with
don't
us.
disappoint.
Oh, I'm sure. I happened to hear some of the backstage riffing before we even got started, so I have no doubt, Libra. But I want to give some folks in the audience some background on you first before we get started. So, Lybra Clemons is a seasoned C-suite executive with over 15 years of human resources, talent, and diversity and inclusion experience at Fortune 500 companies. She is responsible for guiding and scaling inclusion strategy and diversity initiatives across Twilio's global workforce. Prior to Twilio, Lybra was global head of diversity and inclusion at PayPal, where she managed and oversaw all global diversity initiatives. Lybra has also held critical roles in diversity and inclusion with Morgan Stanley, the Brunswick Group, and American Express. She serves on the board of directors at Makers, How Women Lead Silicon Valley, Executive Board of Advisors, and has been recognized by Black Enterprise as one of the top corporate women in diversity. Wow. So welcome, Libra, to this dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking
So I'd
forward
love,
to it.
so I'd love to start with just maybe having you articulate what is unique about Twilio's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes. So let me give you a little bit of background as to why Twilio and why I joined, and then it could kind of weave into the uniqueness of our approach and our role. So as you can imagine, in 2020, after May, every company decided, oh, wait, do we have diversity? What are we doing about it? Should we reconsider what we've committed to? There's just the world is watching, and there's just a lot of racial injustice that we have yet to address with our DEI initiatives. And so at the time, I was, of course, being contacted by every company on the planet. Like either they didn't have a head of diversity or they had someone, but they weren't quite sure that they wanted this person to continue in the capacity that they were continuing it. But most of it was that they needed someone to really take the company to the next level from a DEI perspective. Um, and so Twilio at the time, just so everyone understands the calendaring of this or the timing of this, Twilio announced in January 2020. This is before the pandemic. This is before the George Floyd and Amy Cooper. In 2020 January, Twilio decided that they were going to hire a chief diversity officer, which is huge, a chief meaning that this person is an executive, more than likely reporting to the CEO. This is one of the first chief diversity officer roles, mostly in the Silicon Valley, that would report to the CEO, and that they wanted to kind of expand the DEI remit and make this person an executive and be part of the executive team, which was game changing for Twilio. So that's what's one thing that was very, very unique, Nancy, before all hell broke loose in 2020. Fast forward to June and July, a lot of companies came out with different commitments and money and all of the things. But Twilio, along with different initiatives, decided that they were going to commit to becoming an anti-racist organization. They didn't commit to doing anti-racist training. It was, we're committing to be an anti-racist organization. Another thing that was very, very unique about Twilio, that drew me to the job and it drew me to the role. I was talking to so many different companies. They wanted to do this, they wanted to shift that, they wanted to consider this, but Twilio was the only company that committed to bringing in a chief diversity officer that reported to the CEO, which I don't care what anyone says, it's game changing. And then also, there was going to be a full commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization. Little fun fact, I don't think they knew exactly what that meant, but nobody did at the time. So that was unique for me to step into that role because I'd like to think that I am a someone that disrupts. I'm a disruptor. And what I know in the years that I've been doing diversity, equity, inclusion, Nancy, it hasn't worked. It's been okay, and you're seeing incremental changes, but to radically shift and think about anti-racism as an approach to solving all DEI things, to me, was very, very unique. And we've stuck to that commitment. We've stuck to the commitment to the company. We've stuck to the commitment as we're all going through so much in 2022. We spent a lot of time learning about anti-racism. Most of the people have read Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. The executive team, Jeff and I have worked on building the foundation together of anti-racism. And that's also unique. Our CEO didn't just have talking points and say, hey, I love this. No, we actually were rolling up our sleeves, spending a lot of time understanding anti-racism and what that means for in a corporation. So that's kind of the uniqueness, but I really wanted to give you a bit of the background so you understand how I entered in and why we are still continuing on this journey.
Yeah, and that's so valuable for the listeners, right? Because many of us, right, especially being in the job market or looking at new roles, in fact, as I'm hiring engineers, often they ask me, what does the makeup on your team look like? Because to your point, it's not just enough to talk about it, right? We need to
Right.
take action. And what better than action than to have real representation in your team? So maybe as jumping into, for our listeners today, as someone applies for new roles, right, and looks into the various companies that they might be interested in joining, right, and they're looking at each company's overall diversity metrics, how can they get more specific with the data that they're looking for? And what should an interviewee ask the company as they're making their decision?
So there's several questions, so I'll just break those down. First thing is an interviewee should always just do your homework. And that is, what does the company value? What does the company look like? One of the things that's important for me, I need to go to the website and see who is part of the executive team. And if I don't see anybody that looks like me, or then I'm struggling, because I'm like, if I can't get to that level, or I don't see anybody role modeling that level, I think that's going to be a little bit harder for me to navigate. So I think that was something that was important to me. And I think people should do their homework. I also think that everybody has a DEI report. Most companies, not everyone, I shouldn't say that, but most companies publish their diversity, equity, inclusion data. I'm of the ilk, and this is what Twilio believes. We use data to move and not prove. I don't look at data just to be like, oh, they have 14% women. I don't even know what that means. But at Twilio, we look at the data, but we're not proving anything. We're not communicating and sharing and publishing our data just to say we're better than. We share it, we're transparent, but we use that information for us to make very, very specific changes to how we do things. And that's part of the anti-racist approach. How are we promoting equity at all costs? How are we making conscious, deliberate, consistent decisions every day that promote equity? And so I don't focus on hiring. I also don't think that anti-racism or DEI is focused on representation or representation in general. That's part of it. But I do believe that if people really want to understand and do their homework, they look at the philosophy, look at the CEO, how they operate, how they position themselves, what their commitments are. Are they sound bites? Are they PR statements? Or how involved is the CEO in this work? Where does the chief diversity officer, who do they report to? What is their role? Where do they sit? People say it doesn't make a difference. As someone who sat in different roles, it makes a huge difference. And so for me, it's less about, I do think the numbers are important. I think numbers don't lie, but it is not the only indicator. I think I would like to see what other programs, what other issues are happening, what other initiatives there are, but also the people that just are honest. Like, hey, you know what? We haven't figured it out. We're committed to it. We don't know it yet, but this is what we're doing. And are you able to contribute to the community of developing diversity, equity, inclusion? That's also something that's really important. Is the company that you're joining as an interviewee, open to hearing different voices, open and providing space for people to contribute to the journey. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't always think about. But it's hard when you're interviewing. You're trying to do it all, you're reading all the information, you're asking all the questions. You also got to feel it in your gut. I'm a gut person too, so.
Well, I mean, coming from Amazon, right? That aligns really well with our Write a Lot, and sometimes you just know, right? Given the multitude of experiences that you've had in the industry, right? So I think that hits a nail on the head, Libra. Is DEI is so much more than just recruiting or hiring, right? But you touched upon a few themes here that I want to call out for our audience, which is where does the chief diversity officer sit, right? You mentioned executive team, reporting structure directly to the CEO, areas of aspects of representation, right? So thank you for kind of walking us through what is your definition of DEI. And back to actually one topic that we also touched upon earlier is you mentioned when you're looking around at different companies, right? You look at their maybe board of directors page or their C-level page, and you see if there's someone who looks like you or you can identify with, right? So in the past, you've said Black VPs are a lifeline for hiring and retaining diverse talent. So can you expand on, as coming from that perspective, why these employees are particularly vital to organizations?
So I don't know if I said that directly, but I can expound on that a bit. There are the VP level at a tech company is probably the kind of what we consider the most senior. You have your VPs, you have your senior vice presidents and your executive vice presidents, but the VPs are what we consider our leadership. And one thing, and I'm not sure, I'm going to put the statement into context.
Sure.
When I joined Twilio, I joined the same day as Jeff at the time had a chief of staff who is a VP, and she's Black, and we joined on the same day, and we joined a call together, and we were like, oh, how exciting. And so with that, I've also connected with other Black VPs, which is critical at a tech company because normally the numbers are very onesie twosies, but it is that lifeline. Because no matter where you are in the organization, as a senior leader, whether you're Black or you're woman or however you identify, you want to find people with similar experiences that you feel safe and you trust, that you can have those conversations and connect with. And we do it all the time. Our Black VPs, we get together on a regular basis. We text, we call, we have conversations. You need that connection because I don't care how evolved your DEI or anti-racism is, it's still the world. It's still made up of people who come with different experiences and different biases, and it's never going to be a perfect place. And so you need that network. And so to have the VP, our Black vice presidents come together, and there are times when I call them like, am I crazy? Am I crazy? Did this person say, like, just someone that understands my experience. It's so helpful in navigating spaces that are not always for you. And so that's why I think it's important to look at, who is in the leadership, but who's around you so that that's why our employee resource groups, all employee resource groups, that's why people love them so much. They gravitate towards them. They're supposed to be there to help create a community of people that have similar experiences, but they're also supposed to be there to help you learn more about what this other group looks like. So it has been a lifeline to me to have that group of Black VPs. If I didn't have that, I would really have a hard time. It's hard no matter what.
Absolutely. And so for those of us who might be in organizations that do have the onesie twosies, right, and they're actively trying to bring more diverse voices to the table, how would you recommend they think about ERGs?
So, our ERGs are at a point, I think, in general, where there are times when I think we should evolve our employee resource groups. I think that as 2020 was a year that we've evolved diversity, equity, inclusion, I think the ERGs were an amazing lifeline to helping us do that. But I also think that there's an evolution. There's kind of this next phase of what the ERGs can help us do. I don't think the ERGs are there to help recruit Black or LGBT people, and that's what their job is. And if we're not doing it, it's all in the ERGs. I think there's a lot of I think there's more to the ERGs than just that. I do think that we can leverage ERGs for a number of things, to your point. One is the community. It's the community. If I'm a woman and I want to, and I'm struggling with what it's like to be a woman, or whatever issues that women who identify as women seem to have that are very similar, I want to join that network and an affinity group so that I can learn and have that support. And that's helpful to me. It also helps me to have those conversations as a woman. Like, I'm a woman, I want to get to that next level. If you've been in that space and you've had that experience, Nancy, I want to hear from you as a woman. Say, hey, what are the resources that you used? What did you use to navigate? How did you position yourself? What does that look like? And for any affinity, what are those things and what are those barriers that I can use what are the barriers so that I can leverage those resources to help me break down those barriers, so for me to move forward. So with that, yes, the ERGs are absolutely fantastic. I also think that the ERGs provide a safe space for people. If I'm joining a company and I have, if I identify as a person with a disability, I want to know there are other people out there like me where I can have those conversations when something is not right or something's going wrong. So I think there's just that natural connection of like, I'm joining and I'm feeling like this is a community. I'm a community person, by the way. I keep using that word. The other thing is for our ERGs, which is great, whether it's from recruiting or retaining, is we've leveraged our ERGs for policy changes. And as we are evolving our anti-racist practices, part of our anti-racist work is creating an anti-racist decision-making framework for major decisions that impact the company. And so we want to leverage our employee resource groups to help us. Did we make a mistake? When we decided to become remote first as a company, did we consider people from various demographics that may or may not be impacted by that decision? And so we leverage ERGs to help us. Like, let's run this by our people with disabilities ERG. Let's run this by the women's ERG. Let's run this by our family ERG to get their feedback around it. So there are ways that we can use the ERGs beyond just recruiting. I think it's really important. It's community driven. I think that's focus groups, but it's also for retaining and helping us to find professional development opportunities within that particular cohort.
And so speaking of retaining, one concept a lot of folks think about as well is, how do I advance my career, right? And you touched upon that as well. So in this day and age of some companies, for example, we mentioned Twilio are remote first, some are adopting a more hybrid approach. But given that I'm sure a lot of us have performance evaluation periods coming up, is if a company is remote first and you might be maybe a little bit shy or out of your element, how do you establish a community? How do you establish a network of folks you identify with? Do you have any?
I mean, how would you do that at work if you're shy? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is like everyone, and I hear your question, but I am a huge fan of remote first for many, many reasons. Part of it was having conversations with different focus groups and different marginalized communities who did not want to come in the office, or people asking them questions about their hair or asking questions about their accents and all of these microaggressions that come out. They do come out on video, but they're like pronounced in person. So I do wonder about how, if you are shy, if you're introverted, if you're not one to be out and about and you don't feel comfortable doing that on video, I can imagine there was probably the same concern in person, and probably more pronounced because you felt obligated to do it when you had a team lunch or when everybody was in the conference room and everyone spoke and you didn't. But our goal is to ensure that we are providing space for people, no matter where they are, to feel like they can connect as a community. So whether it's through the ERGs, whether it's through virtual coffee chats, or just having an opportunity to say, you know what, I can tell this person is probably not as comfortable reaching out. I know what it's like. You don't feel comfortable. I joined Twilio in the middle of the pandemic. I've never physically gone to the office every single day. Meeting people is so hard. It's so hard. I get it. But it was just like, And I've become more, while I have a big personality during COVID, after COVID, I became so much more introverted. My energy at the end of the day is done. I don't want to talk to anybody. I need a moment to process. So I get it. And there are times when I don't want to have those individual conversations, Nancy, where I can build community and build trust so that when it's time for performance, people say, you know what, I know Lybra, and this is how these are the things that I've heard about her, and they can advocate on my behalf. But I've made it an effort to do it in my slow way, in a way that works for me, that allows me to do it on my time and my space. And I think virtually, you can do that more than if you were in person because it's on the spot. Like water cooler, I don't understand why everybody was like, oh my God, what about the water cooler conversations? Their most exclusive thing you can do is have water cooler, because who's having water cooler conversations? Extroverts, people who are constantly pushing themselves to the front, people who are introverted or people who just don't want to have those, they don't have water cooler conversations. The other thing about water cooler conversations in person, if you think about your leadership living in a high cost city like San Francisco, and for folks that are marginalized communities who don't live in high cost conversations, they're not going to be in the same office with those leaders to have those water cooler conversations. So in my mind, while virtual is by no stretch of the imagination perfect, I think in so many ways it allows people to have just as much access as others, because you still got to do it virtually by Zoom. So it takes a bit more time. And I find that people who are not as open to building those personal relationships, it's a little harder to do, but you can do it on Zoom. You can do it for 15 minutes. And at the very least, you could have touched base. And you could also share more information by video, by Slack, by email, if people still use that. And you can share your information versus feeling like you have to speak up about it. It's also more so in writing. So I don't know if that answers your question about communities and whether or not people have an opportunity to connect in terms of performance review, but I do think it is shifting the way we are looking at performance. And I think it's allowing people to be more creative about connecting with people versus it just being in your face, and advocating for those who are all in your face. Those are the ones that get all the feedback. Those are the ones that benefit from those interactions.
Yeah, so it's helpful to explore how you think from a perspective of someone who's working in a remote first, right, environment, is coming from the DEI and also HR perspective. Has additional, let's say, we talked about policy as well changing during this time. Has additional policies been introduced or additional metrics been introduced to assess or do performance evaluation in this remote first world?
Additional information. Say more about that, because I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Sure. So we talked about, for example, someone maybe not feeling comfortable to turn on their video all the time. I mean, I'll be
Yeah.
the first to admit that, right? But with that said, is the way that companies are looking at performance management or evaluation changing as a function of, let's say, to your point, not everyone lives in a high cost area,
Mhm.
or not everyone might be comfortable turning on their cameras all the time, right? So
Yeah.
there's going to be less face-to-face or live
Right.
conversations that are happening. So is that also spurring a corresponding change in how performance evaluations are performed in companies?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could be. I mean, I can see that. I do think that once you become remote first, and I think companies have had 2 years, almost 3 years to test this out, the face to face to me has become less of a determining factor. It's more about the impact. So I'm hopeful that in a positive way it does shift. But those are for companies that are remote first. There are companies that are making people go back in the office. And so you're back to the same old, oh, did you get the FaceTime? But I do hope that it is shifted so that you don't have to. I'm not always on camera. There are times I don't want to be on camera. What you missed earlier is my mom, who I live with my parents right now, which is a whole nother story. It's temporary, in the middle of a call, being like, honey, I got your tacos for you. Those things are legitimately going to happen. I don't hope that's not going to impact my performance. It should not. But what you are seeing are real life things happening in people's lives. Sometimes I have to be off video. Sometimes I just don't do video. I think we're allowing, and as a senior leader, as a role model, and I use that air quotes because I don't know if I am, I'm great. If I'm not, okay. But that I'm choosing to be unapologetic about when I can be on video and when I'm not on, when I am on video and when I'm not, and how that should and does not have any impact on the work that I'm delivering. So I'm hopeful that, Nancy, your point is that I do hope that there is a shift in how we're looking at performance. And I think when you're remote first, it does take out that artificial, not inclusive opportunity for those who can, be all up in front of everyone, who feel comfortable doing it, for those that actually have water cooler time, for those extroverts that suck out the air from everybody else and not giving others opportunities to actually shine. I'm hopeful that it will, at the very least, remove that as an indicator as to how good you are doing or not. So I don't think that FaceTime, video time, distractions, kids that are running and dogs that are jumping across you have any impact. This also goes back to the conversation I had earlier about our CEO. Like, I know I've seen this. Jeff is like, he loves his kids, he loves his family. At any given moment, his child will walk in and they will have a conversation while he's on Zoom. And that makes it okay that life is happening. He's like, I got to be off video. I got to go pick up my kid. If your leaders are being legitimately concerned about life things that's happening, it sets the tone for how we are looking at our employees and top performers, and knowing it's not always perfect and that things are going to happen and you're not going to always be able to connect with everyone, but here is my performance as a result of it. So I think that you are going to see a shift. At least we are.
Yeah, and as someone said to me, right, on Zoom, you're all just boxes, right? One next to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And so switching gears a little bit, a lot of us are really excited for this new age of, using video calls or doing a lot more things online. Is in the next 5 years, what DEI tech or innovations do you think will change the industry of DEI?
Wow. I have no idea. And I'm saying that because who would have thought well, actually, I would have thought we would have been virtual at some point 5 years ago. So that's not a thing. I do know there's a lot of there's a focus on getting people to reconsider visible identification because you are on video. And so if, like I said, if the two of us were no longer on video and we're just having the conversations and you couldn't see our names, how are you having these discussions? You know what I mean? And I think it becomes like anonymous, just like there was this whole thing about using anonymous resumes, taking the names off and the schools off and just looking at the content. So, and then I'm wondering if it's just kind of blind interactions, you're just hearing voices. I do wonder if there's opportunities for people to rethink, or just not even rethink, but does that remove some of the bias that people actually encounter based off of what you see in front of you, if you can see? So I wonder about that as an opportunity. I do believe that more and more learning is being done virtually versus in person. And that, to me, of all the things, and I am the most pro remote first, but we're rolling out anti-racist learning workshops, which would be so much more effective, Nancy, in person. And we are doing it virtually. And we have had to train ourselves to consume information to which we have to practice that will help us shift who we are and how we interpret things, and do it in a virtual setting. And so typically that has not worked. And people really struggle, Nancy, with like getting that and like, oh, I'm going to start going on Facebook, or I'm going to start, texting someone else while you're supposed to be in the moment and consuming information that's really going to help you to become a better human, to become an anti-racist, which is how we're contributing to our company. And so I don't know what the next technological innovation is going to be to help us to think about it, short of like virtual reality. And a lot of people are considering that as an opportunity for us to step into someone else's shoes. So you have an idea of what it's like to be part of their lives. And I've done a few virtual reality simulations where I think I was a disabled vet, and I was navigating through a corporate environment or getting from one location to another at an event, and just I think I had a something with my leg or something, but it was eye-opening in so many ways. But then I left it, and then what? So I knew that I felt it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I do think there is VR that people are introducing to DE&I so that there is more empathy, so that people fully understand what it's like to be in someone else's experiences and someone else's shoes. I'm not sold on that yet, but I am thinking about ways that we can consume information where it doesn't feel like, because it is video, that you have someone that's captively engaged and involved in everything that you're saying during these workshops, so that you can actually take that back and try to be a better human. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like. So it could be VR. I don't know. But right now I'm still kind of stuck in trying to figure out what anti-racism looks like and what that's going to be in 5 years. And then what kind of technology can help us get there.
Well, I think on that, I would love to hear your best practices from conducting online learnings, because that's something actually at IT we're super passionate about, is how do you bring upskilling content to folks remotely, right? That they can access from their living rooms or wherever is convenient for them, and continue accelerating their career.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very hard. The first thing we have to do is make sure, first of all, breakouts help. Small breakouts, because then you're forced to engage and forced to have a conversation. The other thing is, for 60 or 90 minutes, if it's a lecture for 10 minutes, I'm off. I got ADD, I'm doing things. I'm like, oh, did I go grocery shopping? Did I such and such? Like, you're just not in the headspace. I do believe that the first 5 minutes, if you don't capture people, you're done. So it's like immediately going into questions, immediately engaging people where they have to do something in the first 5 minutes, where you capture them, and then you go into breakouts, and there are breakouts along the way. And it's kind of disruptive, but if you don't have it, you are not engaged. And so it's a trick, it's a science. I think people are in an art of like trying to figure out when is that breaking point when you recognize that people are no longer listening. Now, you will always have people that don't care. You will always have that. You will always have people that are just like, I'm not interested, I'm not doing this. But there are people who are half in, half out. And that's most of us, because we're distracted during the day. So what's going to pull you in the first 5 minutes, and what's going to keep you going?
You know what? I'm going to use that strategy for my next workshop, and
Yeah.
that would be great. So I'd love to wrap up today's conversation in one of my favorite questions, which is for listeners out here who are mid-career and they're looking to accelerate their career. As someone who is in a C-suite role, what advice or learnings would you like to share with our audience today?
So one of the things I have learned is that some advice is that I have become so much more vulnerable. And I think that oftentimes you, as a leader, you think you can't be. You feel like you have to know all things. You have to be all things. You have to be stoic. You have to be this. I'm not going to let them see me sweat. And I think it's also finding the environment that allow you to do that. But I have learned to be so much more vulnerable, accept feedback, hear it. That was hard for me. It's hard for me, especially when you're Black, when you're constantly getting unsolicited feedback on a regular basis. You're just like, God, like, shut up. But I do believe that taking some of the feedback, being very thoughtful about it, actioning on it, and sitting with it and doing these, how much of this is really true and how much of it is not true, and how much of it is that if it could be true, what can I do about it? And so I believe that oftentimes as women and people of color, we're constantly on the other side of so much. And that's true. There's bias all the time. But in the midst of it, it's kind of peeling out what is really, really your issue, because everyone's got their stuff. What's your thing, and what are you going to work on? And what are the steps you're going to take to actually improve and get better? And that's something I had to learn the hard way. And I think that a lot of people feel like, oh, I got this bad feedback. Oh my God, it's going to ruin me. It doesn't always ruin you if you catch it early, if you acknowledge it and you do the steps and you do what you can to try to improve and keep going with it. And it's most of the time at this certain level, Nancy, it's not necessarily your work product. It's how you've responded. It's how you've handled situations. And I think a lot of people get mixed up. It's not always the EQ. It's not always the IQ, it's the EQ. So my advice is do the work. I also think at a certain level, get a coach. Like I was the most anti-coach. Oh, I got this. I know. No, you don't know. You always need someone that's going to help you and just going to be like, this is how I saw it. And someone that's you trust that's going to help you to get to that next level. And that's really how you orient yourself, how you respond to things, how you handle yourself in situations. And I think a lot of people miss that. I think they think it's more about your work product and your output, like I said. And I think that's part of it. But your leadership style is critical, and that's everything. So those are the things I would say I would leave people with. I also think it's important to stay curious about all things, staying curious. Like if someone gives me feedback, I'm just going to dig and be like, can you give me more information about it? It's not that I doubt it. I just want to understand it. And so it's just kind of staying very curious in all things that I'm pursuing.
Wow, those are powerful takeaways from our audience today. And Lybra, I just want to thank you so much again for joining us this morning and imparting your wisdom.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was great. Really appreciate it.